Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming and welcome to the second day of the conference. It's certainly been a very stimulating and exciting couple of days, and I hope today will be as stimulating for everyone. I wanted to sort of just start maybe with just asking the members of the audience, how many of you are learning or teaching practitioners? And how many of you identify more as a sort of technology specialist? There's quite a lot of people who didn't put their hands up there. I think this is interesting. I think what we really want to talk about today is the theme of getting to the heart of education. So really looking at innovation and the role that innovation and technology is playing within education. And we've got three fantastic speakers here today who are going to take us through some of the territory. And I hope that at the end of the three talks that we'll be able to have a few questions and a little bit of conversation amongst the panelists as well. So start to think about that and really start to pick up on the theme around the future of learning, where we are now, and how we can maybe start to close that gap between where we are and that notion of the future of learning. So our first speaker today is Esther Wojcicki, and she's an amazing and inspiring woman. I think it's fair to say.
Thank you.
And her background's in journalism, but she's been working for a long time as a teacher and working to inspire very large numbers of students as well. She has currently 700 students at Palo Alto High School. She's also based at Stanford University, where she works closely with startup companies today about her experiences and her vision for the future of learning, and start to present some of that territory and landscape around education. So I'd like to hand over to Esther.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here. And thank you for this invitation. So I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about my educational philosophy, and I'll give you the story of my teaching. So I have been a teacher for 36 years, and I'm still a teacher. Can you imagine that? I haven't given up. So my goal is to explain how students can get involved and engaged, and how to empower them. And so I'm really excited about this topic, getting to the heart of education. So as we all know, our world has changed dramatically. Just take a look at, we've got drones, robots, and unfortunately we also have fake news, right? One of the problems. We also have MOOCs. Yesterday morning we talked about MOOCs and how they work and whether they're effective or not. And so I'll talk just a little bit about MOOCs today too. We also have artificial intelligence everywhere, invading our space, especially in the adaptive learning part of it. So we have computers that will actually teach the kids, and the question is, does it work? It seems to work. I mean, at least so far, as long as they're not doing it all day. This is the major change. Notice when we start using computers. And most people, when their child is misbehaving in a restaurant, misbehaving at home, misbehaving wherever, this is what they do. I don't know if you've ever seen what children do today when you give them a book. Most children that have been exposed to these technological devices, they take a book and they go like this. They swipe it because they don't know that books have to be turned. Check this. Mom, I'm going to go out and play soccer. But now, today, look at how they play soccer, right? Online. Notice this change. It's true. So social media has taken over, as we all know, and phones are literally everywhere. On this planet, we have more phones than human beings. And if you go anywhere, this is what you see. Everybody's taking pictures with their phone. So we have ongoing cybersecurity issues. Just last week, Marriott Hotels said 500 million Starwood guest records were stolen. It's just one of many. It's happening all the time. So check this out. Look at when students are learning. 2-year-olds can play a computer game. More 2-year-olds can play a computer game than can ride a bike. Here's some more. Twice as many kids aged 2 to 5 can play with a smartphone application than can tie their shoes. About more small children can open a web browser than swim unaided. I mean, kids are really technologically sophisticated here. 58% of children aged 2 to 5 know how to play a basic computer game. So we definitely have a lot of kids that are technologically sophisticated. So the way we learn has changed dramatically. How do we learn in the 21st century? How do we learn? If you don't realize, this is how we all learn. And the kids are all learning like this too, which is why when they come to class, they seem to know a lot more than what we thought they knew. As a matter of fact, sometimes they know more than the teacher. And so that gets to be somewhat of a challenge for the teacher. Udacity, Coursera, Khan Academy, edX, these are all places where kids can go to learn. YouTube, Google. This is the #1 learning tool. This is it. We all have it. And if you think the kids aren't using it, and in some countries where they've banned it, this is probably not a good idea. Also, this is a learning tool. This is how we're all learning today. This is a bit of a shock. It was a shock to me. This is 1 billion education hits on YouTube every day. 1 billion. 1 million videos, education videos, are uploaded to YouTube every day. So, you know, lots of people are looking at it. So YouTube just launched this. I don't know if you know about it, YouTube Learning. And you can upload your stuff, your videos there. And so can students. And it's a place where people can go to learn. Over 300 online learning platforms. A lot of them are out here, actually. They're great. I met a lot of interesting entrepreneurs. So mastery learning and real-world learning are the keys. Mastery learning. Mastery learning means you do it till you get it right. You don't just do it once, get a bad grade, and then hope that somehow or other you're going to learn it the next step. It's mastery learning and real-world learning. It happens, all learning happens when it's tied to the real world. If you just can imagine your own situation. You know, whenever the learning was not tied to the real world, you probably forgot it pretty quick. So, however, today we're still teaching for the last century. The worldwide curriculum is outdated. We're still doing that. This is the curriculum we're using. 1893, the Committee of 10. Everywhere. This is what it looks like. We have typical subjects in all schools, all colleges, and it's all lecture-based. Focus on memorization. In the 20th century, the focus was memorization, and today, memorization is still our focus. Is memorization learning? That's one of the things we're talking about today with the heart of education, is memorization learning. That's something you should just ask yourself. Do people just memorize and forget? Are we preparing them to be self-learners? Are we empowering them to challenge long-held assumptions? Here, famous Harvard physics professor Eric Mazur, he did a test. He said, test taking promotes memorization. He tested his A students a year after they had taken his class to see what they remembered. None of them could pass the test. None. 10% of what they had learned is what they remembered. I was pretty sad, especially for me, a teacher, right? I don't like to think that's happening. However, tests control what we learn. That's what's driving the whole thing. Tests. We're all targeting the test, and here's the test. The PISA test. Everybody wants to have their country be at the top. But by the way, the country that ranks at the top, everybody know? Finland? Finland does not do very much testing in their own country. Isn't that interesting? Maybe we should all consider not doing that. What should students be learning for the 21st century? Well, this is what the PISA test tests for today. Science, math, reading, collective problem solving, and financial literacy. I agree with all that. That's good. However, they should be adding some things that we need today. How about programming, cybersecurity? You know, the web's not going to work very long as we have these constant cybersecurity issues. Complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. Doesn't test for any of those things. Those are the things we need. Complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. The top 10 skills that are needed. Look at 2020. Number 1, complex problem solving. Number 2, critical thinking. Number 3, creativity. Can you learn to be creative by reading a book about it? Huh? How about that? We're all born curious. And you know what happens? Fear of failure scares it out of us. Curiosity is educated out of us. This is what Sir Ken Robinson said. I'm sure you all heard of Sir Ken Robinson. He gave the #1 TED Talk on education. We stigmatize mistakes, and we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make. And the result is that we're educating people out of their creative capacities. So if I stopped right now and said nothing else, this is like the most important thing, because we need to have a creative population for the future. We've got to solve these problems that face the planet. And that means that we have to have creative solutions. So students learn by doing. I know we've talked about it yesterday. We talked about it in a lot of different sessions. They don't learn by watching. They don't learn by listening. They don't learn by reading about it. They learn when they do it. They get introduced to the topic when you are watching, listening, or reading. But they don't learn it. Learn it means you can actually do it yourself. So try learning to be a surgeon by reading about it. Would you like to be operated on by that doctor? Or how about, seems like a lot of people are learning to drive by reading a book, actually, when you're out there on the street. Or how about learning to code by watching me, for example? Watch me code. Actually, I used to try to teach a lot of things, specifically the Adobe software, by showing the students how to do it. I showed them what a good job I was doing. And then the next day I took them into the computer lab and had them do it. And guess what? None of them could do it. You know, they took copious notes, but they couldn't do it. So 90% of school is lecture-based. Puts kids to sleep, but teachers still keep on lecturing. University lectures are ineffective for learning, the analysis finds. All the universities. I'm also at Stanford, and we have a hard time changing the way we're doing it. This is what we do in lectures. Actually, I perfected this technique myself. Why don't MOOCs work? Yesterday, we talked about that a little bit. Number 1, MOOCs are lecture-based. And a lot of kids turn them on and then turn them off. Do you know what the failure to complete rate is on MOOCs? 95% do not complete the course they're taking. So they lack widely accepted degrees, which is another problem. But third, and I just talked to Sebastian Thrun, who's the founder of Udacity, last week. He said number 3 was the most important. Lack of social interaction, lack of social relationships. That's the number 1 problem. Why do we all pay money to go to a gym instead of exercising by ourselves at home? And you have to get to the gym because we all like to do things together. And it's the same thing with all the learning. So if you can use a MOOC in a classroom with a group of students, it's going to be effective. If you assign that one MOOC to one kid while he has to do it at home by himself, the probability is he won't do it. So the world needs a moonshot in education, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, because it's one we cannot afford to postpone and one we intend to win. This is what JFK said, 1961, going to the moon. And a moonshot in education means changing the way we think of learning in the digital age. I wrote this book in 2015 called Moonshots in Education, in which I explain this philosophy and how it can be done. So the main thing we need to change, I said, was the mindset of the teachers, from a sage on the stage to a guide on the side. But it's not just the teachers. It's the parents. It's the community. It's the school board. Everybody needs to understand. And I'm talking about doing that only 20% of the time. 20%. Other 80% of the time, stick to the traditional curriculum. So if you think going to the moon was hard, try changing the culture of teaching. Academics fail to change teaching because of fear of looking stupid. I know. I'm in the classroom. I know what my colleagues are facing. It's hard. It's really hard. You change what you do, and then the kids all like, oh my God, look at what she just did today, and they all make fun of you. So that's not fun. I agree. But you need to take a step. The more students focus on test scores, the less creative they become. To be creative, a student must be willing to take risk and trust and respect themselves. And it's really hard if the teacher doesn't trust and respect them. The more they memorize in school, the less creative they become. So this is famous Sir Ken Robinson. Do schools kill creativity? He says yes. We're educating people out of their creative capacities. Conformity kills creativity. So we need people who have skills that computers don't have. Everybody's worried about being replaced by a computer. Well, listen, computers don't have empathy, right? They don't have compassion or kindness or respect or creativity. If we teach those to people, then there's no competition. So this is what we're teaching. Listen carefully and follow directions. And this is what employers get. We all get them. Helicopter parenting. I'm sure you've heard about that. We have a lot of that in America. Kids lack control, purpose, they become depressed. The more you control the kids, the less empowered they are, the less confident they are. Look at the rates of depression. 84% of students feel unable to cope, according to this. Depression and suicide among students everywhere. American teenagers are suffering from severe anxiety. I think this is not news to you. But how about this? More German students also suffering depression, anxiety, panic attacks. Half of Hong Kong students show signs of depression. It's worldwide. It's everywhere. The more time teens spend online looking at screens, the more likely they are to report symptoms of depression. Are they all online? Yes, I think so. Impact of too much screen time, the new narcissism. So people are depressed when they lack purpose and when they lack control. So how should we be teaching? With a new culture promoting self-learning. Put the student in charge 20% of the time, just 20%. The 80-20 rule, changing the mindset about where learning takes place. Where does it take place? Everybody know? 80% of the learning takes place outside the classroom. 80%. So let's bring that culture into the classroom. Focus on peer-to-peer education. It works. This is my acronym to help you remember it. TRIC. Trust. This belongs in the classroom. Just think about what classrooms you have that don't have this. Trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. This belongs in every classroom. This changes the culture. TRIC. Empowerment comes when the student is in control. The internet promotes independent learning because kids can look up what they want. It's better to know how to learn than to know. Better to know how to learn than to know. So what should we be teaching for the 21st century? Collaboration, critical thinking, communication skills, creativity, These are the skills we want people to have today, the 4 C's. So the same proposal to change the system, only 20% of the time, 20% moonshot idea. I keep repeating it because I'm used to teaching. Remember when you teach, you just say your same thing over and over. It's easier for teachers and it's better for the student. You imagine you don't have to teach as the same way for 20% of the time. Projects. So here's some moonshot projects. Science. Science is a project. Tech. It's a project. Engineering. It's a project. Math. Project. And now the last one, I've added an M to STEM. Media. Media is the easiest real-world project out there. This is the century of media. We should be teaching media. Media education should be considered a crucial factor in all countries, everywhere. Journalism teaches purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So journalism prepares the students for a world we cannot predict. And now I'm going to show you what I do in journalism. Real-world experience in journalism. It integrates the curriculum. My teaching pedagogy started with the birth of my daughters. So I don't know if you know who my daughters are, but you will in a minute. So here's the 3 of them in Geneva. I lived in Geneva, Switzerland. We had our picture taken while we were shopping. This is the 3 of them today. Susan is the CEO of YouTube. Janet is a professor of pediatrics at UCSF Medical Center, Stanford in San Francisco, and Anne is the founder of 23andMe. So they were my guinea pigs. I tried out all my education stuff on them, poor things. Then I continued trying it out on my students. 36 years of empowering kids. So this is what I did. Needless to say, I had a lot of trouble in the beginning. Okay, it started with 19 students in 1984 on a typewriter, handing out X-Acto knives to the whole class and hot wax. You can imagine how popular I was. Then I met this computer in 1987. And Google Docs and YouTube in 2006 revolutionized my classroom. Today, I have the largest media program in the United States. It's the Media Arts Center. I went from that little portable room to this gigantic 25,000 square foot building. I have 700 students, the largest in the US, 12 publications, newspapers, magazine, television, websites, and 7 other media arts teachers. So this is what the classroom should look like 20% of the time. Collaborative, tech skills, environmental, look at this, flexible teaching environment. You can move the furniture around. Communication, peer-to-peer learning. Creativity, they look a little like they're going crazy there, and I think they probably are. Okay, notice that students in charge. I look like I'm a little bit lost. Here's empathy, all talking to each other. Happy students. Did you ever see happy students? They learn so much when they're happy. My number one problem is they don't want to go home. Okay, that can be a problem. Here they are again, and this is what they produce. Where's my assessment? This is it. Every 3 weeks, 3 sections, 24 to 28 pages, the size of the New York Times. Kids are producing this. It looks like it's professional, but it's not. It's all done by students. This is a centerfold spread, their ideas, their creativity, their hard work. This is, again, more centerfolds. The paper, as I said, is 24 to 28 pages, 3 sections. Published on Issue, by the way, free platform where you can just host your magazines. All the publications can be seen on that. Every 6 weeks comes out all these magazines. This is a magazine. Again, C Magazine. This is Verde, another magazine. All the covers are done by students, not by me. This is Sports Magazine. This is, again, another V Magazine. It's Verde Magazine, talking about this terrible gun problem we have in the United States. I don't have time to talk about that. We have a science magazine, travel magazine. The pictures look professional, but let me tell you, they're all taken by kids. We don't publish anything not taken by a student. We have Foreign Affairs magazine, photo magazine. All the magazines are printed by this company, which is affordable. Every day we publish online with websites, and we have a television show. It's actually pretty funny to hear them talk about the weather. Okay. We win more gold awards than any school in the United States. Who pays for it? Wait till you see this. They pay for it. They sell advertising. They learn entrepreneurial skills. Peer pressure keeps them motivated. They control the publication. Google Docs, they correct each other's stories. Google Groups, they communicate. They Google Sheets, they manage who does what when. Most students don't know what fake news is, according to Stanford. Let me tell you, journalism students can pick it out. We should all be teaching journalism somewhere in the curriculum. It's real-world learning. Here's a guy that I've worked with. He's 19, from Monterrey, Mexico. This is his project. Transcript to recognize real-world learning. He just made this. He moved there from Mexico to Palo Alto to work with me. Here's a few of the graduates from Palo Alto. Daniel Mason, best-selling author. Jeremy Lin, he's not a news reporter, not a journalist. He's a basketball player. But he pursued his dream. That's the goal. Lisa Brennan Jobs, Steve Jobs' daughter, wrote this book recently. I don't know if you've heard of it. Small Fry, about what it was like to be his daughter. Gotti Epstein, The Economist. He's the media editor for The Economist. Ben Hewlett, a lawyer, founder of Hewlett-Packard, grandson of the founder of Hewlett-Packard. These are just some of the thousands of kids that are pretty much happy doing what they want. Brian Wong, vice president of the Alibaba Group in China. Liz Gaines, a journalist for Recode. And my most famous, no, not the most famous, this is the second one, Noah Snyder, the economist in Russia. This is my most famous student, James Franco, the actor. I'm sure you probably have heard of him. Every student needs support. She showed me I could take my dreams as seriously as I wanted. He wanted to be an actor. His dad was a mathematician. Can you guess what his dad wanted him to be? What can you do now? Encourage 20% time in all the schools here in Europe, in the EU. Let the kids and the teachers and the administration come up with their own plan. You as leaders can support changing the way we teach in all schools. By the way, check this cartoon. Do you want, is it always, as you say, sit, stay, heal, never think, innovate, be yourself? Do we want that for our kids? My next book, coming out in May, this coming year, How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. Can pre-order it on Amazon. So support them, believe in them, they'll believe in themselves. Join the global moonshots movement so that your school doesn't cost anything, you can just do it, can be part of it. Global Moonshots in Education. If you want information, there's an info address. Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thanks so much, Esther. I think it's an inspiring presentation. I think you'll agree, and I think we'll all be rushing to go and buy that book. So we just take a breath and move to Anders Flödstrom. Now, he's another very inspirational man. I would say a bit of a provocateur, and obviously a very inspiring man in the area of digital innovation, entrepreneurial education. He's also got a link to Palo Alto, actually, interestingly, and his early career was based there. But he is currently professor at KTH Sweden and also Edu Director at EIT Digital. So I want to thank him very much for coming and presenting today.
Thank you.
Anders.
Okay. Yeah, you will get the engineering version of Esther, now I mean from me. Well, about guinea pigging with your children, I mean, I'm then totally innocent. I mean, my most successful son is a professional soccer player, and I'm far away from being any connections with that whatsoever. I'd like to talk to you a bit about innovation and teaching innovation and teaching generic skills connected to innovation and how you can do it. This background to innovation was actually why EIT, which I'm working for, the European Institute of Technology, Innovation and Technology, was created. Actually, it was created, I would say, by one single person, President Barroso, who was the European Union president 10 years ago when we were entering the framework program we are in right now. And what triggered him to look at creating EIT in Europe was a trip to US and to MIT, where he saw the environment around MIT as a university being so creative, so innovative, and so much entrepreneurship going on, and he saw the need for that happening in Europe. So then the idea came up, and he pushed that. Innovation itself, when did we start to talk about innovation? When in my world, innovation was invented by a Nobel Prize laureate in economics, Robert Solow, in 1967. And it was essentially invented because the macroeconomic models for economic growth that builds on how many employees you have, how much you pay them, how much capital you put into equipment, that couldn't explain the growth in productivity. The productivity increased more than the macroeconomic models. And first, he called it the technology factor. After a while, when this factor was growing and you could see it was a clear trend, it started to be called innovation, because it was the way you create the new technology, people at the work learn new technology and become more productive, and productivity increased. And today, when we look at it, it's said that 70% of the productivity growth is due to innovation, and the capital and the others stands for a minor part. So it is really a major factor. And the question is, of course, can we do anything about this factor? Can we promote it even more? And much about what Esther said is a way to really promote this more. So if you want to grow both people, economy, technology, whatever, why don't try innovation? Invention is the creation of a new concept. We all know that. Innovation makes the new concept practical and commercial. That's the secret with innovation. Creativity comes up with ideas, yes, but innovation makes ideas reality. That's why innovation. And science a bit converts money into knowledge, but innovation converts knowledge into money. So you can see it really is something very substantial. So when we started the EIT, we said, let us educate innovators. And we also said, if we have no education, we will get no innovation. As simple as that. If we don't learn to educate in creativity, in innovation, in entrepreneurship, in leadership, in all the generic skills, we will not progress. And what we did simply was that we contacted 20 European universities, top universities within technology, and we told them, you give us your curricula in different subjects. In this specific case, your master programs or your doctoral programs, and we will take out half of the curricula in the master program and put in work on education on generic skills. And surprisingly enough, 20 universities was brave enough to say, well, we give you access to our technical oriented curricula and we would like to be part of this experiment. And I'll come back to that. But the innovation education is, as I say, strongly coupled and leverage each other. Generic skills can and must be learned. The methodology, which we can see, is simply what we call education, research, and business integration. And it's learning by doing. If we have the technical curricula online, which we have as an alternative to students on campus, all what we are doing in the ERB integration in the generic skills are face-to-face in this case. We are digital, and that, of course, makes life a bit simpler when you're going to work with innovation, because innovation is, the digital transformation is really changing things. So what we do, we see immediately that it matters if we can create a new type of engineers and a new type of researchers to push the digital transformation. Then it's another factor that if you look at Europe, we miss about 1 million digital transformers to be able to handle that development. This is what we created, EIT Digital Academy. And in principle, we have a master school, we have industrial school, industrial doctoral school, and we have a professional school where we work directly with professionals, and we collect people or young people from all over Europe for summer schools to introduce them to these concepts. And you can see, I mean, there. And it all builds on the innovation and entrepreneurship blended model. To repeat my version of what Esther said about the 21st century skills and competencies, here are the 9 skills that is based for our quality system. If the quality system, we cannot prove through the quality system that we really are working and fulfill the learning outcomes for this, then we are not doing our job. In principle, this influences the whole way we do the education. If you look at the front end of education, it's always a selection process. Our selection process is based on that we should recruit people that have an entrepreneurial, an innovation inclination, that are really interested in participating in this type of program. And there are tools available. We use, among other tools, a tool created by Gallup called the Entrepreneurial Strengths Finder. And so we work on really getting the students that we believe should do it. And then we have a number of technical programs, and you can see they are the typical one where you have, I mean, if you work with digital transformation. Today, education is sort of a bit in a turmoil, and there are many things that happening. And this is just a joke. I mean, of course, but you could hear it. Why don't we go to school.org instead of going to the classroom? It might be easier to go in many ways to go to .org. And how do you make a choice of the new professional roles when there are so many? How do we really help that? And when we discuss this with some of the universities we work with, and we discuss the online possibilities that's becoming available, we often meet of a bit of scareness. I shouldn't say it's motivated, but I think the scare is basically that instead, for my university, instead, as it says right now above the logo university, in next stage it will be a degree awarding institute. It will not be a university. You will come there to get the degree stamped in this case. And in worst case, I mean, the degree will lose its importance. And it is a reality, at least as a delivery mode. I won't discuss advantages and disadvantages, but there are 81 million learners, I mean, on the so-called MOOC platforms available in the world today. And that's more learners than we have in all the world's universities together. So, I mean, it is a delivery method of knowledge that is really competing. How they compete, yes, that we can discuss for a long time. It is also talking about the skills gap. I'll leave that. It's also another thing that is happening right now, and that is when we look at people coming out with a degree and with the expectation of what they're going to be doing in their profession, the gap between what they expect now and earlier and what they got has grown. They think that when they get out, 50% of them start to say that they are overeducated. After a while it gets a bit better, but still after 10 years, 25% thinks that they really are overeducated for what they're doing. And this is, of course, not a good situation when we have this sort of a mismatch between expectations and for us that's educating right now, we look at the skills as a part, the use of knowledge. It is in the digital transformation we are right now. This has really changed in the sense that the last mile between the knowledge and the skills and doing the work has been pushed very much over to, I mean, us as educators. First, it was a shared responsibility. You got the knowledge, you did some sort of a skills training, and the company took care of the skills training, getting into the company and doing the job. When generic skills are coming, that becomes much more a responsibility for us as we work with EIT, so we push that. In skills in use, the skills are gonna get pushed into the companies, the technical skills. Labor market information is not in a good shape. It's a bit like haystacks of curriculum, qualifications, and job postings. And everyone hopes that artificial intelligence should take care of that, but we'll see. When we look at innovation itself, there is a trend right now When we started, open innovation become sort of the leading world, and any way you could innovate was good, and it was pushed that way. And today, it's more going back to that we would like to have disruptive innovation. Innovations that means a serious change in how we work and live, and how we will work and live in the future. We look at quantum computing. We believe that perhaps by going into quantum computing, we will get a disruptive, that we will increase our capacity to understand data much, much more. We go into neural. We start to look at for innovations where we really get the connection between what the medical one and what we are doing by machine learning. So area by area, we are looking towards disruptive innovation. This also changes the way we educate and the way company hires. We recently started a program for industrial doctorates for PhDs, where the topics are delivered to us from European industries. And we have had tremendous success with that. European industries deliver topics, they sponsor the PhD candidates, and in turn, they get a more disruptive knowledge and more disruptive competence into the company to be able to work on these issues. And there are 3 European actors, working on this, getting this disruptive innovation process going better in Europe. It's the European Research Council, it's EIT, and it's the new Horizon Europe program, European Innovation Council. And they all together will be sort of the core of bringing Europe more in the front of disruptive innovations. So if you look at our innovation portfolio, it's being digital means that you're serving all the others in an essential sense. If you look at the EIT as a whole, it's taking care of 8 knowledge and innovation areas, with its climate, its digital, climate, energy, food, health, production, manufacturing, and raw materials, urban living. All these areas have their own EIT and their own education, the way I describe it, and they're pushing the challenges in these areas. Being digital means that you're serving sort of all areas. So in a way, we have to make a choice. What areas do we believe from a digital perspective we should push? And in that case, we are pushing financial technology, we are pushing health and well-being, urban living and mobility, and industry and the infrastructure. And of course, there are very exciting things happening in all these areas. I don't think any one of you haven't read, that blockchain technology will change financial technology forever, or that industry and embedded system robotics will change the way we produce things. So in all areas, this type of innovation portfolio will push technology. To end, I think we are in a way that we are changing a bit our view upon innovation. For a while now, we have been looking upon how can we extract value out of innovation, out of the economic growth innovation. have been creating. And it has been a movement in that direction. Right now, when we look at the innovation topics and look at what's happening in innovation, I think we are back in creating values for people as the important driving force. It is creating value for people, creating value for customers, creating value for workers that are the driving force, not extracting economic values out of the system. And this is also the theme for a book. I think Esther has even written a chapter in this book called The People-Centered Economy. So, thank you.
Thanks, Anders.
Thanks very much, Anders. I think that was also very inspiring and very focused around the innovation theme and the main theme, I think, of the conference as well, where technology is changing society and the impact of that on education. So I think that seeds really well to the next speaker, who's Ben Williamson, who's somebody that I'm fortunate enough to have known from the beginning of my career, about 20 years ago, when we were young researchers, and he's become a senior researcher recently at the University of Edinburgh. His work is really focusing around educational technology and policy, digital technologies and practices in schools and universities. So the frame of his work is really looking at socio-technical frameworks and landscapes and what the impact of that is in the educational context. So I think we're quite excited to hear about his talk. So thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everybody, for having me. 10 years ago, if you remember, big data was going to change everything. It was going to solve every problem in health, in business, in politics, and of course, education, as this big data-enabled brain-machine interface classroom system shows. A decade later, of course, we're now learning some pretty hard lessons about the expansion of data analytics, AI, and algorithms across society. Data simply doesn't seem quite so cool now that it's at the center of many of society's most controversial events. And by controversy here, I mean those moments when technical innovation conflicts in some way with public or political concerns. And it's those controversies I want to get at today. Now, politicians internationally are beginning to ask some hard questions and are looking for answers to some of our current data controversies. And the level of concern at the current time with Facebook, Google, Uber, Huawei, Amazon, and so on, is even leading some people to suggest that we're experiencing a kind of techlash, a backlash of public opinion and political sentiment to the tech sector. Now, the technology sector is, of course, taking this on board. So you've got the Center for Humane Technology seeking to stop tech hijacking our minds and society. And you've got tech universities like MIT recognizing their wider social responsibility by teaching their students the power of future technologies. And the AI Now Institute in New York released yesterday its latest report on the need for regulation of AI and algorithms, which is well worth reading. We're already seeing, though, within education, some signs of a growing concern that AI and algorithms are going to get you. This was from the Times Education Supplement, the Teacher's Magazine, last year. Some of you may know earlier this year, the FBI in the States issued a public service announcement warning that the collection of sensitive data by ed tech could result, they said, in social engineering, bullying, tracking, identity theft, or other means for targeting children. An ed tech lash seems to have begun in part. The UK Children's Commissioner has also warned of the risks of datafying children, both at home and school, We simply don't know what the consequences of all this information about our children will be, she argued. So let's take action now. And books like Weapons of Math Destruction and The Tyranny of Metrics have also become sort of surprise non-fiction successes. And both of them draw attention in part to some of the damaging effects that data can have in schools and universities. So in my short time this morning, I want to share some lessons, I think, from data controversies that we're encountering in education, or have encountered in the last couple of years. Things that I think we can learn from in order to avoid having damaging effects in the future. If you use Twitter, please do feel free to add your own to the Data Lessons hashtag. I'm sure I haven't captured them all, and I'm sure there are other different interpretations. So one recent controversy is the protest by US students against the Mark Zuckerberg-supported Summit Public Schools personalized learning model. So Summit is originally a charter school chain with an adaptive learning platform partly built by Facebook engineers that's now scaled up across many US high schools. But in November, students began staging walkouts in protest at what they saw as the educational limitations and the data privacy implications of this platform. The protesters even wrote a letter to Zuckerberg, which was published in the Washington Post, claiming that assignments on the platform required hours alone at a computer and didn't prepare them for exams. They also raised flags about the range of personal information that was being collected without their knowledge or consent, they said. Why weren't we asked about this before you and Summit invaded our privacy in this way, they asked. And most importantly, they added, the entire program eliminates much of the human interaction, teacher support, and discussion and debate with our peers that we need in order to improve our critical thinking. It has severely damaged our education. So our first lesson, I think, here is that education is not reducible to a math problem, and nor can it be simply solved with software. It exceeds the massive increase in data availability, even from personalized learning platforms. And for many educators and students, education is more than these numbers. It includes the non-quantifiable things like personal interactions, relationships, critical thinking, discussion, and so on. Now, Google, too, has become a controversial data company in education, and earlier this year announced or launched this Be Internet Awesome resources for digital citizenship. The New York Times was pretty quick to question whether the public should accept Google as a role model for good online conduct, given that it's embroiled in all of its own data controversies, staff walkouts, and so on. Through its education services, Google's also, of course, a major tracker of student data, and arguably is shaping its users as lifelong Google customers, which is what the Times was arguing. Being internet awesome is also about buying into Google as a consumer and a user and a personal data provider. In fact, Google was the target of a whole bunch of Times articles last year revealing Silicon Valley influence in public education. It said they were like global education ministries, providing the hardware and the software, the online resources and the apps, the curriculum materials and the data analytics to make public education more digital and data-driven. It's what we might call a kind of global policy making by digital proxy, where the technology is able to influence public education at speeds and at international scale in ways that normal policy simply can't do. So the lesson here, I think, is that students, the media, and the public may have ideas or perceptions or maybe feelings about technology and the companies behind it that are different to those companies' aspirations or the way they think about it. So claims of social responsibility may be competing with other feelings of, say, creepiness about commercial tracking or concern about private sector influence in public education. Data security, privacy, cybersecurity are perhaps the most obvious topics for a data controversy, but remain, I think, really, really urgent as educational institutions and companies are increasingly under threat from cybersecurity attacks, hacks, data breaches, and so on. So the K-12 cybersecurity incident map is doing really important work in the States to catalogue school hacks and attacks, hundreds of them in the last couple of years, importantly raising awareness in order to prompt better protection. And then there's the alarming news of really huge data leaks from some of the biggest education technology companies, raising fears that this is just going to keep getting worse as more data is collected and shared about students. Now, I think the lesson here is that these data breaches, these student privacy leaks, are also breaking students and public and parents' trust in education companies. This huge increase in data security threats risks exposing the industry to media, public and government attack, or this techlash. We're supposed to protect children, it might be said, but we're exposing their information to the dark web instead. Then there's the problem of educational algorithms being wrong. Earlier this year, the English Testing Service revealed results from a check of whether international students were cheating in an English language proficiency test, an oral test. And to discover how many students had cheated, ETS used voice biometrics to analyze tens of thousands of recorded oral tests looking for repeated voices. Had somebody else done the test for the person who's supposed to be the test taker? What it found? 20% of the time, the algorithm was getting the voice matching wrong. And that's a huge error rate, and it had huge consequences. Around 5,000 international students in the UK wrongly had their visas revoked and were threatened with deportation in relation to the UK's hostile environment immigration policy. Now, many of these students have now, or since, launched legal challenges, and many of them have won. So data lesson 4, then, is that poor quality data or algorithms can lead to life-changing outcomes and consequences for students, even raising the possibility of legal challenges to algorithmic decision-making and so on. This example, I think, also shows or indicates the problem with ascribing too much objectivity and accuracy to data and algorithms. In reality, algorithms and the data processes are products of humans in the room, whose own assumptions, or maybe their biases, or simply their mistakes, can be coded into the software that's then used to make those life-changing decisions. And let's not forget either that in this example, the test wouldn't even have existed were it not for the UK government seeking to root out and deport unwanted immigrants. So the algorithm was, in a way, programmed with some really nasty politics. The next lesson is about secrecy and transparency. So the UK government's Nudge Unit, about this time last year, announced that it had been piloting a school evaluating algorithm for school inspection. It could identify where a school might be failing from its existing data. Now, many head teachers and teachers are already fearful of the human school inspector. The non-human, automated school inspecting algorithm secretly crawling around in their spreadsheets, if not in their classrooms and offices, has not made them much less concerned. So a spokesperson for the National Association of Head Teachers said, "We need to move away from a data-led approach to school inspection. It's important the whole process is transparent and that schools can understand and learn from any assessment. Leaders and teachers need absolute confidence that the inspection system will treat teachers and leaders fairly." So the lesson here is that secrecy, lack of transparency, is unlikely to win significant trust in the education sector. Teacher unions, education professionals may reject the kind of AI or analytics tools that many in the room are offering if they don't believe these to be transparent, fair, or perhaps context sensitive. Now, my last three lessons are on data controversies to come. And they all relate to what is starting to be called the Internet of Bodies. The idea that there are now all sorts of devices for tracking and recording the intimate data of your body, of your emotions, and even your brain. So, for example, emotion AI is emerging in education, such as biometric engagement sensors, or emotion learning analytics, or facial vision algorithms, facial recognition, that can determine students' emotional responses to different teaching styles, or materials, or subjects, or maybe even different teachers. So among others, EdSurge here and the World Economic Forum have both been endorsing these kinds of systems to run facial analysis or wearable biometrics of students' emotional engagement. The idea that some aspects of learning or signals of learning can be detected through skin and muscle movement in the face and so on. Now, emotion AI is likely to be controversial, and it is in fact one of the key topics in the AI Now report that I mentioned earlier, because it prioritizes the idea of a kind of constant psychological surveillance, or even surveillance of one's personality and your intimate feelings. People probably remember a few years ago when Facebook was in trouble for its emotional contagion study. This stuff stirs up controversy when you're fiddling with people's emotions. It could even be seen to treat teaching and learning as a form of infotainment, pressuring the teacher to entertain and the student to appear engaged, at least when the camera's recording or the biometric patch is attached anyway. Okay, penultimate lesson is about brain scanning with neurotechnology. We're getting pretty far out there, but this stuff's coming. For example, the BrainCo brainwave sensing neuro headset and applications spun out of Harvard University recently. Such things are based on the idea that the brain has in part become readable. Not your actual thoughts, but particular kind of electrical signals which might indicate something about your state of learning through these kinds of wearable headsets and so on, which can detect brain activity, turn it into digital information, store it, and analyze it, visualize it on a brain data dashboard, and so on. Now, this kind of brain surveillance, however, is just going to be the first step. Ambitions are going to advance to not only read from the brain, but also to write back into it, or to stimulate its neural pathways for more optimal learning capacity. Now, my sense is these kind of neurotechnologies are going to be enormously controversial, not just in education, but everywhere. Reading the brain for signals, or particularly seeking to write back into it, raises huge ethical, even human rights issues. Brain leaks, neural security, issues of cognitive freedom, neural modification, changing the brain to work in more optimized ways. And already, a number of prominent neuroscientists and neurotechnologists and neuroethicists are beginning to call for new frameworks to protect the readable and the writable brain. Now, I've saved my biggest controversy for last, which is genetics, and the possibility of predicting a child's educational achievement, attainment, cognitive ability, or even their intelligence from DNA. Now, researchers in human genomics now have access to massive DNA databases in the shape of what are called biobanks of genetic material and information, which is collected from hundreds of thousands of individuals. So one huge million sample study of educational attainment recently concluded the number of years you spend in education can be partly predicted genetically. These kinds of studies, very large samples using advanced biotech, are going to lead to ever stronger claims of these kind of associations between genes, deep genes in the body, with achievement and intelligence and other behaviors. And these kinds of associations are already leading or raising the possibility of genetic IQ testing for children's mental abilities. So basically, it is becoming possible, according to genetic scientists working in this domain, to study these digital biodata related to education, to develop genetic tests to measure students' mental rating as well. Now, it probably doesn't get much more controversial than genetics and education. What lesson can we learn? Possibly that this risks reproducing some historical and really dangerous ideas about the biologically determined and inherited basis of achievement. While these kind of genetic intelligence tests, some are suggesting, are just a next step towards genetic selection, brain rating, even genetic editing for smarter kids. This raises the risk of a kind of eugenics 2.0. I'm aware, Sarah, that I'm pretty much at the limit of my time, so I'm just going to finish up now. So why are these data lessons important? Well, it's because increasingly governments are starting to get really anxious about all the messes that data and AI and analytics and so on have already got our societies into. And in the UK, we now have a new Centre for Data Ethics within government, and a current inquiry and call for evidence in relation to data ethics across 4 sectors, which includes education. So government is beginning to ask hard questions in the UK about the ethics of data use within education specifically. I was at one of the meetings last week. The politicians in the room were asking hard questions about algorithmic bias in education technologies, the accuracy of the data models in learning analytics, the risk of data breaches, and the ethics of the surveillance of students. And we'll be reporting on these issues in summer next year. So these kind of controversies are now under the microscope in 2018 for reasons that were unimaginable during all the hype of a decade ago. Now, at the Futures Institute where I work, we're starting to figure out how we can develop collaborations between social science researchers, learning scientists, education technology companies, and interested policymakers in order to try and preempt the kind of controversies that are now prompting politicians to ask these hard questions. So by learning lessons, hopefully, from these kinds of controversies, we can ensure we have some good answers to those hard questions, but we can also, perhaps more importantly, ensure that good and ethical data practices are built into education technologies, therefore hopefully preventing problems before they become full-blown public data controversies. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ben. That was a very thought-provoking and very deep, excellent presentation. And I think it's sort of, it's great to now go into the plenary where we can open up to questions from the audience and have some conversation here. For me, when I think back to 20 years ago and how we were conceptualizing the future of learning, I think we saw all these elements, but of course they seemed quite far away back then. Now it feels like we're very much in the midst of quite a serious range of controversies and challenges. So I want to go to the audience and ask a couple of questions. So I think there is a mic out there. So people, if you have questions, can you put your hands up now? And I believe it will come to you. While we're waiting for our first question from the audience, I would like to, oh, hang on, this one here. I would like to start to sort of promote a little bit of thinking now around some of the ideas that Anders, Ben and Esther have talked about in terms of the links between the pedagogy and the practices that we're seeing and the technologies. So I think while in the past this was probably more distant, I think this has really come together, and to the extent where you can start to see that technologies are becoming almost a layer on human behavior. And I wonder what the panelists think about that transition and what we can do as educators to try and address that gap and those sorts of transitions. Who wants to start?
I just wanted to talk about your idea for brain scan. Maybe that's not your idea.
It's not my idea.
But you have to submit to this. In other words, you have to give permission to do it, right?
So the example I gave, which has just come out of Harvard University, is currently, as I understand it, being piloted with groups of students in both China and the US. So they're trying to determine which kind of neural signals can then be translated into useful information for teachers. And so the idea is that the students are having their brains read. The teacher has a dashboard which gives them access to particular kind of neural information indicating levels of attention, engagement, or confusion or anxiety and so on. So it's detecting through the skull, from the brain, particular kind of neural signals. Now, it's a prototype project, as I understand it, but I think indicative of how, in some areas, education technology is trying to get closer and closer to the intimate interior of the individual. So we're already seeing things that can read eyes and faces, perhaps for security reasons, but also for detecting the social and emotional aspects of learning. There are keyboard biometrics and so on, and the OECD is beginning to explore keyboard biometrics for understanding the social and emotional aspects of learning. So I think we see this trend towards a kind of mining of the deep, intimate data of students, which is a step beyond the kind of learning analytics platforms that we've had over the last few years.
So as a teacher, I would say that the best way to figure those things out is to talk to your student.
Yeah.
And to see what's going on. I'm not sure that I would have my students participate in a brain scan. I don't need that to be able to understand what they're thinking.
Well, exactly why I raised it as a controversy. I think these sorts of things are incredibly contentious. I think we need to be having these kinds of discussions and debates about them. I'm not defending the brain scanning or the face reading or the biometrics and so on. I'm raising these as things which I think we need to have serious debates about before they proceed further, or without us really understanding some of the potential implications from them.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I would suggest that they spend their money in a different way to help teachers more effectively.
Okay, well, go and speak to Harvard Graduate School of Education about it. They're the ones who are...
I think I will have a word with Harvard, yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Indeed.
No, I mean, I kind of agree. I mean, we use learning analytics. I mean, in all the coursework. I mean, and it's a wonderful tool. I mean, it really makes things better. I mean, so of course, I mean, it's a balance. My question with brain scan, is this at the scientific level? So it's not just the story we heard before. I mean, we have had these predictions earlier in history, and but you believe that now it is.
What I'm reporting, I'm trying to report and trying to understand what are the scientific claims being made that are believed enough by certain organizations that they are then turning them into technologies and trying to apply them in classrooms. Now, the BrainCo example is brainco.tech. Check it out. It has come out of a collaboration between Harvard Graduate School of Education and Harvard's Center for Neuroscience. So it is coming out of two very credible, high-status, prestigious centers. It has the backing of some of the most senior people at Harvard Graduate School of Education. So I'm not sure I buy into it. There are lots of people who would query the neuroscientific basis of it and would also point to the long history of failed attempts to read brains, as it were. But there are clear signals of this kind of thing emerging. It's not the only example. There's another application called Muse. There's a wearable neurorespiratory monitor available that's been spun out of Cambridge University for that detects neural signals through breathing, apparently. So this kind of science is emerging and being turned into new kinds of devices, applications, new forms of analytics, which it is suggested will give us greater and greater insights into the sort of the intimate processes which underlie learning. It's really controversial, it's really contentious. I think the education technology field needs to be having this kind of debate about it.
Thanks for that. And that controversy will continue on. So I've got a question over here, I believe.
Thank you.
Can you say who you are and where you're from?
I'm Jost Schmidt from Switzerland, ETH. Esther, thanks a lot for your really inspiring talk. I'm a loyal subscriber from Fast Company, so regards to your daughter.
Oh,
at the same time, I'm also on the board of the first outdoor school, elementary school in Europe, based in Switzerland. We try to translate the trick values into practice, in addition to humility, self-efficacy, also entrepreneurial leadership in the early childhood somehow, and resilience stuff, etc. And I always wonder, being employed at a top school, how can I translate this in a management school setting? So I wonder, do you have any moonshot ideas how we tackle the erosion of social and natural capital, and how we really do some kind of action learning towards deep sustainability in the educational sector and the settings we are exposed with?
Thank you.
so it's great that you're involved in a school like that. I think that sounds amazing. I think the research shows that the more children play, the better adjusted they become as adults. And so the fact that you have an outdoor school or a school where students are allowed to play is already saying a lot. And I can say that most schools today, when they're trying to balance the budget and they're trying to cut expenses, they cut out the most important part of this curriculum, which is allowing children to play. And courses that allow for creativity, like music and art and dance and physical education. All the research shows that those courses empower the student to be an independent thinker. And so in the public schools, which is what I'm targeting, because I think all the private schools are already doing it. If in the public schools, we need to make policymakers aware that this is what matters. And I mean, all these brain scans and things like that, well, I think they're wasting their money. All you have to do is look at the kid and figure out. They can tell you where they're coming from. You can see whether a child is happy or not. So I think we should use some of that research coming out of the university. I think it's University of San Diego, and that woman's name was
San Diego State.
San Diego State.
Jean Twenge has done some really interesting longitudinal studies around play and has shown very positive impacts around that sort of strategy. Where you don't see play, conversely, you do see a lot of issues with mental health issues, resilience issues, and so on. So I think that free play in particular is really important to support in your curriculum design. Thank you very much for that question. I think there was another question over here, if we can get the mic over to this side.
I hope I
If you could
answered
keep
your
your hand
question. If I didn't, you can see me afterward.
So, hello. I'm going to give a presentation about the neural correlates of
Sorry, can you say
simulation
who-
game in veterinary medicine.
Can you give your
And-
name and where you're from?
I'm from the Free University in Germany, and I did a research already I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
So,
I was like,
so you are looking
sorry, I'm a
there.
bit blind.
Okay. So I just want to comment on the statement saying that why we are doing neuroscience and we are wasting our money on neuroscience. Actually, we are not. Please come to my speak today because,
Good trailer there, thanks.
because students actually can fake behavior and can fake their answers, and you don't know anything about their learning outcomes from a paper. But they cannot fake their brain activity. So please come and see what happens in the brain before training and after training. That's my comment.
So
Thanks very
I think that's a great idea to come and see what the students are doing, even though they might be faking it. But I must say that, I'd like to ask you the question, isn't that an invasion of their privacy? I mean, if they're young children, you know, do we want to do that to them?
I think that's more of a comment than a question. So I will take another question from
Okay.
definitely from you.
Yeah, thank you. Philip from Germany, actually. And it keeps amazing me how incredibly stupid very intelligent people can be. if we look at a brain reading technology promoted by one of the most esteemed universities of the United States, while at the same time we see a social scoring implementation in China, for example, and knowing that technology that is implemented, particularly in the educational space, will most likely invade all the other areas at some point. And I find it highly problematic to see such developments and not having an appropriate political or social structure to counter such initiatives. So my question would be, apart from running and hiding in the woods and homeschooling your children, what would be the most suitable approach to get conventions, as you suggested, on the use of data, on artificial intelligence, on brain reading or genetic screening technology in that case? Because you're preaching, I think, to the people who are least considered to be powerful in the political processes. Education is not a top priority as much as it should be.
Thanks for that question. Ben, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I don't really know what we do from here because, like you, I have more or less zero power to change the direction of these things. What I do think is really interesting, I mean, I don't know if it's happening elsewhere, but in the UK we have this inquiry, like I said, which has a call for evidence open until the 15th of January, I think. So anybody in the room who's in the UK who wants to submit to that, I think it's a really important chance for us as either researchers or developers to put forward our evidence related to some of these data ethics issues. Because there appears to be an opening within the sort of government and regulatory environment at the moment, particularly, well, in the UK, I suspect in Europe, you know, following on from GDPR and so on. I don't know in the States and so on. So I think, you know, that there appear to be openings for us to at least begin making the kind of arguments that we can about, you know, what are the limits of educational technologies? What are the ethical limits in terms of what data can we collect? And, you know, see whether we can have any effect that way. It may well be that this new data ethics centre we have in the UK becomes an organisation that education can work with. Certainly that's what I'll be trying to do with my limited power, is to make sure that education is part of its ongoing agenda and not just part of a call for evidence, you know, that needs to be submitted to by the 15th of January, so that we can make sure that the limits of ethical acceptability with data collection and education are thoroughly debated going forward.
Thanks very much to the panelists. We are actually at the end of this session now. I would encourage you, if you do have any more questions, do go onto Twitter, and our speakers will try to get back to you on Twitter, or do talk to the speakers now. I think it's been an amazing session, very wide-ranging. I think we talked about ethics a lot, and neuroscience, and really the vista for education. I think it's been very exciting. So I want to really thank each one of our speakers, Esther, Ben, and Anders. Thank you very much.